This is Time Out with Planet Shapers. We share big ideas, inspirational insights, and practical knowledge to sustainably transform the commercial, residential, and public sector built environment.
Good morning, everyone. Today we'll be chatting to Grahame Cruickshanks, Market Development Executive at Green Building Council South Africa. Grahame will be telling us what the 2020 building trends are in South Africa. Morning, Grahame. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Now, Grahame, can you share with us the top 5 green building trends for 2020?
It's always hard to limit something as broad and diverse as a sustainable built environment issue to just 5 items, but I'll give it a shot. So we see retrofitting of existing buildings as a rapidly increasing trend as building owners try to sweat their assets. The new cutting edge on green buildings is net zero. Net zero buildings are buildings which have a net zero impact in their carbon emissions or their water consumption or their waste or even in their ecological footprint on the site itself. And beyond that, another trend we see emerging is regenerative buildings. This really takes net zero to the next level. And those are buildings which in fact contribute more than they take out. And so they go beyond simply neutralizing their environmental impact. They actually give back. In other words, an example could be a building which sequesters carbon by producing renewable energy and feeding it into the grid. Another trend, healthy indoor environments are becoming much more of a priority, in particular for big corporates who recognize the need to create environments where people in buildings are productive, engaged, happy, and in many cases, healthier. Lastly, I would say the skills required to operate in a way that is going to add value in sustainable built environments are rapidly increasing in demand. So upskilling in the area of green buildings is something we're directly involved in, and beyond that, upskilling in the broader sustainability space we see as a mega trend as well.
This all sounds very interesting. Could you perhaps elaborate on retrofitting?
Absolutely. So what's quite interesting is that when you look at green buildings, the vast majority are shiny, brand new buildings delivered to the property sector as flagships. When in fact, what you've got to consider is that embodied energy in buildings, in other words, the energy that's locked into the building as a result of all the construction and materials used to originally build the building, contribute enormously to the environmental impact. So retrofitting existing buildings has a really positive environmental contribution because all of that energy, that embodied energy, is locked in. And also, as we see the South African economy sort of not really growing at a rate that it has in the past, in fact, neutral GDP, building owners want to extract more value from their assets. And so they're retrofitting buildings to either retain tenants or to attract tenants, because a retrofit can add to the quality of the building, building services, building finishes, and it can also add to the appeal of the building from a corporate branding point of view. So there's a range of reasons to retrofit a building, in other words, to take an existing building and upgrade it.
Please tell us more about net zero certification.
So the concept behind net zero follows on from a discussion around traditional building certification systems, which encourage building owners and operators to do less bad. By that, what I mean is a green building that reduces its energy consumption, reduces its water consumption, reduces its waste to landfill is not as bad as a building that would have been constructed or operated in a traditional manner. But it hasn't neutralized its impact. It's still impacting. Net zero buildings completely neutralize their impact, which is a remarkable concept if you think about it. Because what it means is you're taking a contributor to the built environment and you're removing its operational carbon emissions from the built environment. So the net zero certification acknowledges projects which go to the next level of green building certification and really take the environmental impact of built environment head on and say, we're going to actually neutralize our impact. So net zero certification is rigorous. It consists of a framework into which building designers and contractors and operators can then plug in their different green building initiatives to meet the standards set in the net zero certification.
You mentioned earlier that regenerative buildings are taking net zero a step further. How so?
So just imagine we go from buildings which do less bad to buildings which neutralize their impact to buildings which actually contribute positively to the social, economic, and environmental conditions we find ourselves in. At the moment, we focus on environmental. I'll use the carbon emissions example again. If you are operating a building which has got enough renewable energy installed in the building to generate more than the building's needs and feed that energy into the grid for other users to draw on, you're actually supplying more clean energy than the building needs, and you're therefore regenerating the energy drawdown from the national grid by contributing zero carbon renewable energy to that grid. Renewable energy comes in different forms, as we know. It can come in the form of wind turbines. It can come in the form of solar. There are various different forms, but we see solar as the most rapidly growing market in South Africa because our solar conditions are so good.
Grahame, you mentioned improving the air quality in our homes and offices. Where does one start?
One of the most important things to consider with green buildings is that the indoor environmental quality has an enormous impact on people's experiences in the indoor spaces. And it can also dovetail very, very nicely with other green building priorities like energy consumption. I'll give you an example. One of the factors to consider when designing a green building is the energy load on the air conditioning in the building, if it's going to be an air-conditioned building. One of the contributing factors to that is the amount of heat gain through the facade. A glass facade has a lot of heat gain. So if you reduce the amount of glass on a facade, perhaps by reducing the window size, you then reduce the loading on the air conditioning system. But what you've also done is cut out some of the natural light that penetrates the building and people's views to the exterior. So it's important to strike a balance. People in a building benefit from receiving natural light through the windows and from being able to see outside. A biophilic experience is one where you're able to see the natural environment, and it's quite a pleasant experience for most people. It's quite subconscious as well. Very few people realize that if they're looking at the back of a refuse area, it makes them feel very different. Well, they would realize that actually. That's a bad example. But if they're looking at a blank wall, yes, they'd feel very different from looking at a view of a forest.
Absolutely.
And so in order to improve the indoor environmental quality, factors like air quality and natural lighting come into play, but have to be balanced against other green building criteria. Air quality can be improved by ensuring that the ventilation system allows enough fresh air into the ventilation system in order to ensure that there isn't a buildup of carbon dioxide that people breathe out when they're in the indoor environment. Having said that, that balance between energy consumption and indoor environmental quality has to be struck once again, because introducing outside air at a different temperature from whatever it is being heated or cooled to for the optimal indoor environment does require energy consumption. And so very efficient air conditioning systems are now being introduced to the market, which allow for fresh air to be introduced at a relatively low energy consumption, let's call it energy consumption rate, and still allow for a high indoor environmental quality and air quality. Air quality is affected by the materials used in the building as well. There are sneaky little microscopic compounds called volatile organic compounds, and they exist in paints and adhesives and a lot of sealants used in the construction industry. Volatile organic compounds are not good for human respiratory systems. And in fact, the new paint smell, or as a lot of people like to talk about, the new car smell that you notice when you get into a new car or walk into a newly painted, freshly painted room, is the result of those volatile organic compounds, and they're not good for people. So reducing those compounds in an indoor environment or eliminating them completely is an important part of approaching green building design and operation. It's really important with existing buildings to ensure continuity. So the building manager needs to know that he's got a building with an indoor environmental quality that is set to a particular standard. And when the time comes to repaint a wall, that building manager must make sure that they use the same kind of paint or paint to a similar standard to what was originally used so that there is continuity.
That sounds really amazing. Is this a new concept or has the market already adopted this practice?
It is really amazing. And because I work in this space, I'm so totally embedded in the green building space that I really enjoy the fact that it's such an exciting industry and that the things that we do in it are so innovative. Having said that, the uptake isn't as rapid as we would like. Less than 1% of the buildings in our country have been certified, and we would like to see that number dramatically change. Also, having said that, there are a lot of projects which are green, which are not certified, and we understand that that's an important contributor to the bigger picture. One of the biggest drivers that we see behind the trend towards building green is resource constraints. What I mean by that is that energy and water are becoming scarcer and more expensive. And as a result of that, a lot of building owners, building occupiers are starting to evaluate the resource consumption of buildings, and that leads to greening of the buildings. A green building takes a more holistic approach than just evaluating energy and water. It evaluates things like the ecological footprint, which I mentioned earlier, related to the landscaping on the site. It evaluates the materials used in the building, connections into the transport industry to reduce transport emissions getting to and from the building. And importantly, a green building also addresses the quality of the indoor environment in buildings.
How would one go about implementing green building practices or obtaining net zero certification?
Contact the GBCSA.
What is the process that takes place?
What we like to see is for project teams and building owners who are interested in net zero to upskill themselves and to ensure that they are trained in the net zero certification and that they ideally have a bit of a track record or a member of the professional team has a track record in green buildings and a green building consultant who is qualified as a net zero accredited professional through our training programs has to be a part of the team. The key thing when the professional team starts to evaluate a project that is targeting net zero certification is to understand the building must be as efficient as possible in the net zero category that it's targeting, whether that be energy or water, carbon or water or waste or ecology. If the building hasn't optimized the energy consumption of the building or the water consumption of the building, targeting net zero is going to be a very tall order. So just imagine a 50-year-old building with no energy efficient lighting in it and some old-fashioned taps and toilet systems that use a lot of water. Targeting a net zero certification for water would require collecting an enormous amount of rainwater on the site in order to feed into those systems and producing an enormous amount of renewable energy to feed into those inefficient systems. If, however, all of the inefficient energy consuming appliances and services in that building were stripped out and replaced with highly efficient ones, air conditioning, that kind of thing, and all of the water consuming services in the building were replaced with highly efficient water appliances, that project would then have a fighting chance of being net zero because the consumption requirements would be balanced by whatever could be supplied through the renewable energy or the water catchment on site. So the project team needs to start off thinking about the building in a way that ensures that it is designed to operate in the most efficient way possible, and then start to tackle how to supply the building's needs to ensure it doesn't draw off the grid.
So it really sounds to me like the most critical elements in staying updated with green building trends would firstly be training and making sure that you regularly update and upskill yourself, and then also GBCSA membership.
So we didn't touch on GBCSA membership, but the benefit to being a GBCSA member is that you stay abreast of the sorts of trends we're talking about. And the way to do that is to ensure that the communications and the knowledge research that we release to the market, that you're receiving those. That can be done through our publication, Positive Impact. It can be done through our blogging. It can be done by networking at our events. And then, as you mentioned, the upskilling in our different training qualifications is almost a given, an expectation in order to tackle, in particular, certification.
Thank you very much for your time today, Grahame. It was lovely talking to you, and we'll chat again soon.
Great.
This was Time Out with Planet Shapers. Make sure you visit the Green Building Council South Africa website to find out more about membership, training and events. The GBCSA works with our membership community to champion a collective cause to accelerate the development and adoption of best green building practices so that all buildings are designed, built and operated in an environmentally sustainable way.